Okay, cool. All right. So the first question you might have is, who is this weird-looking person in front of you? And yes, I really do get that excited when I have a boarding pass to a business trip. I actually bummed a ride here in a car now, much slower. My name is Tess Flynn, otherwise known as Socket Wench. That's Wench, not Wrench. I'm the module developer for Flag Friend, and for examples. And I'm a Drupal developer with FFW. So let's all get into the time machine, into the machine with the flux capacitor, into the spa that travels through time, into the TARDIS, all into these time machines, and let's go all the way back to the distant past of 1999. In the beginning, there were web pages. There were webmasters who hewed, hand-artisanally crafted HTML with a text editor and put it on a site with FTP. We had to fight dinosaurs on the way to the server for every individual packet. It was madness. But it had one wonderful thing. We knew every page on the site. We knew what we were doing. Every time we added a page, we could link it in. It was manageable. We knew exactly what we were getting. And then the internet kind of took off, and then it got a little bit crazy. And we no longer could actually just make pages hand-artisanally crafted anymore. It didn't work. It was too complicated, it was too busy. So when we came to the first redesign, it really hurt. It just was painful, and you didn't want to do it again. So someone thought about this problem and said, you know what, if we made this website thing smarter, we could put a piece of software in there called a content management system. And this content management system would do all of the extra stuff for us. So we have a whole bunch of these content manager systems, including Drupal. Now Drupal, and a lot of these CMSs, that's what they're called, CMSs, don't think in pages. They think in content. Now, the weird thing about content is, content doesn't have to be a page. It can be a page, but it doesn't have to be a page. And another weird thing about CMSs is, instead of just having content in your site, it tends to type the content. It tends to put these in these little boxes. And it does this kind of as a matter of course, because the software needs to know how to treat each individual comment. All right, that kind of makes sense. A lot of early content managers were very specific. You had these content types, and that's it. That's all the types you ever got. Drupal made this a lot more complicated because you can make your own. Now, whoa, that opens up a whole bunch of questions, and that's why we're here today. Content types actually form the basis of content management. It's how content types actually organize and work with content, because otherwise it's just pages. So what is a content type in Drupal? So we have a content type right here, and it has a few major components. They all have a title. They all have 0 or more custom fields. They all have permissions associated with them so that users can work with the content type, can edit content that's of that type, and so on. And there's also some metadata. It exists, I'm not going to talk about that. So what's all this for? Why do we need all of this stuff to do content stuff? Why do we need to structure our content? What was wrong with pages? Pages were fine, right? Well, why do we have this? I'm done. I love it. Sorry. Imagine that you have a really weird house. Not as how weird as my house, but pretty weird. And your house is full of a bunch of drawers. All your walls are all drawers. And if you need to find something, you end up digging through these drawers in order to look for the thing that you want. The thing is that this is a really messy way of doing things. You don't want to rummage through all the drawers in your drawer-full house in order to actually find the thing you're looking for. You need to organize that. So we organize it by putting it into categories. We take out those drawers and we label them. And we make sure that the kind of stuff we put in those drawers is of that kind of stuff. So we have clothes, we put in the clothes drawers. We have tools, we put in the tools drawers. Games, we put in the games drawers. Cooking stuff, we put in the cooking stuff drawers, and so on. Now we can work a lot more effectively because we actually can find our stuff. And this is especially important when it's 1 in the morning and you're half asleep, but you still need a thing. Types give organization to your content. So how do we make these content types? Well, first we need to go to the content type admin page. Now this presentation kind of deals with Drupal 7 and Drupal 8. So things are going to be manage structured content types. Now in Drupal 7, that was called admin. Manage, admin, kind of the same thing. Okay, so to make a new content type, we go to the content type admin page at manage structured content types. Looks like this. And we can actually see there's a manage link at the top of the menu. And then there's a content types link over here. It looks different in Drupal 7, obviously. And then there's a big button that says add content type. We click that type, and we can actually start creating a new content type. We enter in a content type name. This isn't a particularly good content type name, but it was one I am when I made the slide. You might also notice another interesting little detail. When we create a new content type and enter the display name, Drupal will also create something called a machine name right next to it. And this machine name is actually used by Drupal internally to identify what the type is. Now the display name can be changed at any point. You can change it now, yesterday, today, tomorrow. However, the machine name, once it's created, you can never change it. It's set in stone, because that's how Drupal identifies it. There's also a description. Now that description is displayed in a very important place in Drupal, but I'll show you where that comes in later. There's a whole bunch of extra metadata fields, including what we want to call the title field, which is itself a bunch of metadata. So we have all these different metadata fields that we can fill in. Most of the time, you can leave all that by itself. Click Save and Manage Fields, and then you'll get a message that your content type was created. Done. So far, our content type has a unique machine name, a required title field, and behind the scenes, it created a body field for us. So if we go and create a new piece of content with this content type, we go to the main page, we click the Add Content link. We'll go to the Add Content page, and you'll notice we have the display name of the content type that we've created and the description right there. That's where our camera goes. Click the My Content Type link, and then you get the Content Edit page, or in this case, an Add page. And it has a title and a body field and some other stuff. So there you go. We made a content type. The body field's a multi-line WYSIWYG text field. It's optional in Drupal 8. You actually don't have to have body field in Drupal. In Drupal 7, it's required. Kind of. You can actually pull it out, remove it, rename it, replace it with something else. But some pieces of module code aren't used to that exception, and they can kind of flake out on you. So just keep that in mind if you're going to do something like that. Also behind the scenes, a bunch of permissions were created by Drupal for our content type. And they deal with granting the create, edit, delete, and permissions to user roles. This is one thing with Drupal is that it grants permissions to user roles, not users. And it always grants, it never denies. There's no deny permission. There's always a grant or nothing. To manage permissions, you go under Manage People Permissions tab, or in Drupal 7, Admin Users Permissions. Looks like this. We have a whole bunch of permissions for our content type. And it will have a column of different user roles that we can assign those permissions. All we have to do is click the checkbox. All right. So how do we know what kind of content types to make? I mean, making one's pretty easy, but how do we know what to make? Well, first you want to do a content audit. If you have an existing site, what you want to do is actually go through the site and select what you want. You want representative content. You don't want an exhaustive audit of all the content on your site. Because if your site has 8,000 nodes, that's going to take a long time to audit. But there might be, 50, 100 that are actually pretty good, that kind of embody the different kinds of content you expect to have on your site. And when you have amassed that list, you'll say, okay, that's pretty complete for all the stuff we do on the site. Now, if you don't have that content existing because it's a new site, mock the content up. Go ahead and create it. Make it look the way it does until your customer, your client says, okay, that's enough. That sounds about right. So here's a bunch of content that we pulled. So we have one content called Lessons from the Issue Queues, Flag Module Recipes, something called Me by the Lake, and also a page that's called some content called About Us. Okay? The next thing that we do now that we've amassed our representative content is we want to look for similar kinds. Now this can be an intuitive process, but if you want to make it a little bit more scientific, you can do something called a card sort. You can Google card sorting online. There's plenty of tutorials on how to do it. The basic approach is you write the thing you need to sort on an index card, and then you put all those cards in front of someone, and you say, you have 15 minutes to sort this, go. It's a really basic approach. There's a wonderful book by Donna Spencer called Card Sorting, which teaches you about additional techniques, some additional findings, nice ways of running a card sort, a lot of important stuff. It's a really useful book. So we've taken our pieces of representative content, and we found out that they kind of fall into these particular categories of stuff. Blog posts, forum posts, picture or gallery posts, and pages. Pages are still a perfectly valid content type. You still need a page to display stuff sometimes. We don't care who the author is, we only care it has a title and some stuff in it. Okay, that's valid. We want to abstract it at this point. So we take all these these different types, these different categories we found, and we create content types to match each one of them. A blog type, a forum type, a picture type, and a page type. So we're done, right? Right? Is there something behind me? Nah, it's not there anymore. Now that we've made the content types, we need to start thinking about what goes into the content types. And this is where we hit a bit of a snag that's really easy to fall into. Problems with blobby bodies and creeping WYSIWYGs. So you might have heard this phrase before, just make it work like Word. Yeah. Yeah, make it that. If that's the way that your conversation with your client starts, you've got a long, long project ahead of you. Because really what people want is they want a WYSIWYG that they could dump all the stuff into. And okay, that sounds fine. Okay, so here's our editor, we have a title, and we have a body field. So what kind of stuff do we want to let them use in the WYSIWYG? Okay, well, some basic formatting, some bolds, some italics, things like that, sure. But then you start thinking about this, or you might start talking with your client and go, well, we might want to include some predefined formats, and we might want to include links, and things like that. Okay, okay, that doesn't sound too bad. That seems reasonable. And then you say, oh, but you know what, we need to include multimedia because we have all this extra stuff we have to add, like videos and audio and all this other stuff. And then it's like, okay, I'm getting a little nervous, but okay, I mean, the customer's always right? And then you have even more conversations with them. So, you know what, we need this really weird custom call-out plugin that you need to write yourself that only works on our site. And suddenly your toolbars are eating the entire content area of your editor, and no one can find anything. And what happens is that you have a blob that is asking you, yes, feed me more WYSIWYG buttons, give them all to me. That's not our only problem. We have other problems. When we have unstructured content that we usually put in a body field, we have a problem that the content kind of becomes a bit of a tyrant. Because it basically is sitting there going, I determine my own format, and you're going to all deal with it. And then it pushes it out to all the different ways that people can actually see all of your content. And all of your content is just going there, please spare us, Lord Content. It's a push model of content. The body field isn't flexible enough for different targets. And you basically have essentially baked in the format at first. It's kind of like cooking. If you make cookies, you take the chocolate chips and the flour and the eggs and the milk and you put it all together and you get cookies. And that's fine if you just want cookies. But what happens later if you want to make oatmeal cookies, or if you want to make raisin cookies, or if you want to make peanut butter cookies? You can't get the ingredients back. You baked it. It's done. It's gone. You have to start over again. That's not any fun. That means that it's also not reusing your content. You're not leveraging that body of stuff you've already created. Now, this is not what we can do in cooking, but we can do it in computer technology. And then the problem gets even worse. So we have an editor that goes out and writes some content in a WYSIWYG. Now, we don't want that, and usually we are saying, okay, just target just the desktop cloud. That's what most people think of as a default assumption when they write content. Now, we don't want people to actually just write directly and have no oversight whatsoever as to what goes on the site, because that's going to lead to chaos. What we want to do instead is we want to have someone who oversights that process, who goes through and reviews it, make sure there's no spelling mistakes, typos, but more than that, to make sure that the content has a unified voice for your company, for your client, so that it all sounds the same, so it all looks the same, so it has that same kind of feel. If the organization is particularly huge, you might have to create some style guides. Now the writers have to follow the style guides and go through the review process. And only after it's been vetted by all of these different steps can it finally be pushed to the desktop. This process is not wrong. This is a perfectly valid way of doing things in a modern site system. But then mobile came along and screwed things up. So what happens? We used to be able to just tell people, just use the desktop site. Sure, okay, fine, but now we're basically sticking the user in an endless cycle of scroll, zoom, and repeat. And it sucks. No one likes this. All right, fine, so we can't just have them use the desktop site. Okay, sure, let's make a separate mobile site so it displays properly on iPhones and Androids and whatever else. Okay, that makes sense, but now you're taking all that desktop-sized content and you're squeezing it into a little tiny screen. And some of the behavior patterns that you're used to on the desktop don't work on mobile. Callouts, sliders, embedded media, pagination, some of this stuff doesn't make any sense on mobile. And it's frankly difficult to work with. And people will just not go to your site if your mobile site sucks that badly. And there's an even more subtle problem. Sometimes we have content which is really large, like a title field that's really big. Let's take this particular actual real title that I saw on an actual game development site over a decade ago, and yes, I'm old. Real AI based on the human brain. Now that seems perfectly fine. It's not that long of a title, but on this particular site, they displayed most recent posts in a block on the side of the site. And they didn't have a very smart truncation algorithm. And they only removed the last 2 letters of this particular line. And now people are imagining this dystopian future of omnipotent underwear. Even if you have a slightly smarter truncation algorithm, the problem is that it really just is infuriating because it doesn't really give the user what they want. It doesn't tell you what you're doing. It's like going, here's some content. Is it the content you're looking for behind door number 1, or door number 2, or door number 3? Which door is it? We don't know because the end got cut off. We can't just make separate sites. We have to have separate channels. So we create mobile content and desktop content. We push it to the desktop and mobile. But now we have another problem. Now we have to have separate developers that are used to working with the UX patterns of each one of these targets. We have to have separate writers who know how to write content that is actually going to be appropriate for each individual endpoint. We have to have additional reviewers and additional style guides in order to support all of this. And it sucks! When you separate the channels, you multiply the work. You have to have separate processes, standards, and staff. It works, but only as a stopgap. It doesn't work for long because pretty soon it's going to cost you too much money to maintain it. and no one will like it. And then, of course, if you still have separate sites, it breaks sharing links. Have you ever opened a mobile link, m.something.com, on a desktop, or vice versa? It sucks. And now your developers have 2 sites to maintain. And the problem gets worse. Eventually it does get better, but for now it's getting worse. Sure, we have the desktop, sure we have mobile, but the thing is, consumer technology is becoming increasingly more integrated into our lives, and we get things like smartwatches, and we get appliances, and there's suddenly all these different weird use cases that we haven't even thought of, like, can I put my Twitter feed on my oven? There are just too many channels to separate. It's not a sustainable solution. So let's take a step back and have a few beers, a few metaphorical beers, and maybe a real beer later. And think about this, go, maybe our problem isn't our front end. Maybe all of this stuff about our front end is not the problem. What if it's this? What if it all started with the thing that we assumed was perfectly fine when we started, that unstructured content, that body field? Maybe we need smarter content, adaptable content. We need content that can be pulled, not content that's tyrannical and pushes. So instead, we have content that's smarter, and we have different ways that that content can be viewed. Those front ends know more about how they want things displayed than the content does. So we might want to have our different front ends go, I need the full content because I'm in the desktop browser and I've got theoretically infinite bandwidth. Or I need a short title and a medium summary because I'm a mobile device and that's all I want. And the smarter content will take that query and go, sure, no problem, here you go. It's all good. And you get just what you need. The thing is, you can't query a body. No matter how many WYSIWYG buttons or smart tags you add, it's a flat file. It's slow, it's not going to be inconsistent, and it's not going to be the same across different writers, across different tools, as your technology evolves. It won't stay the same. So it's going to be slow and it's going to hurt. Plus, body has no semantic meaning. It's the junk drawer of content. Who in this room has a junk drawer? Okay, pretty much everybody. Full disclosure, this is my junk drawer, one of many junk drawers, actually in my house. And it's got, let's see here, a tube of super glue, some polished rocks, a sewing kit, wall stickies, some reflective. Is that right there? Is that my name tag for my first job? Do I still have that? What the heck? When your house is full of junk drawers, you can't find anything, even if you put it in separate boxes. But more importantly, if you're only looking for the one thing, the cookie that you baked 7 months ago, why would you want to keep that? But it's a metaphor, never mind. If you just need that, you can probably go to the drawer you put it and open it up, and there you go. And it's fine, because you just needed that one thing. But let's say you want to take content from multiple pre-baked pieces of content cookies and remix them into something new, like content cookie ice cream. How can you do that? Everything's in a junk drawer. How can you find it? How are you going to be able to turn this into a system? You can't. You have to hire someone to go through each piece of content, review it, culminate it, and put that final piece together. It sucks. You're never going to find all the pieces you need if your house is full of junk drawers. Because junk drawers just limit reuse. You can't recombine those pieces of content later. So let's take a piece of content. Okay? Now we already know it has a title and it has, yes, a body field. Okay, fine, it has a body field full of stuff. But what's in that body field? Let's say, for the sake of argument, that this piece of content is actually part of a famous person interview series, and it always has kind of the same formula. It has, a gallery of pictures of the person being interviewed. It has a bio section of the person being interviewed, a key quote, a biggest lesson section from the person, and also some author information. Okay, sure. All of this content is kind of the same across all of the interviews, but it's in a body field. Let's say you just need to change one thing. Let's say that your author, gets married or grows a second head or something, and they need to change the picture. Well, that's fine if you need to change one thing in one particular piece of content cookie, but there's not just one piece. That piece might be all over the place, in multiple places. And now you have 14,000 different pieces of content you have to go through, either manually or write a script and pray that it still works on all of them. So let's take that piece of content and let's bust all the fields out of it. Let's take all of the stuff that was in that piece of content and turn it into separate things. And that's how we're going to make smarter content. It doesn't bake in the formatting. Instead, it provides what front ends with what they need when they need it. It doesn't just shove it all down their throats. And instead of having a huge body field, we have chunky fields that we can actually use that are much smaller and easier to manage. We've structured the content. So how do we dispose of that body field? Or other bodies? To add new fields in Drupal, what you want to do is go to Manage Structure Content Types, find your content type in the list, and then click the Manage Fields link. Here's what the page looks like. So we have one body field and nothing else. To add a new field, we click the Add Field button. And then we get two choices. We can actually add a new field or reuse an existing one. Well, this is a new site, so we haven't made any new fields yet. So let's just make a new one. We select the type, and then we'll notice we get a pop-up again. We get a display name and another machine name. Just like content types have a display name and a machine name, fields in Drupal also have a display name and a machine name. We click Save and Continue, and then we get a settings page. Now the settings page depends on the kind of field that we've selected. So they're all different, but it's pretty obvious what to do. We go through the field settings, we click Save, and we get a message that says that our field type has been saved. All right. What about that other option about reusing a field? Let's say that we have a lot of different fields that we've created now, and we don't want to keep making new fields all over the place, because you'll start noticing patterns. You'll go, oh, this field's kind of like this field, so why don't we just reuse the same field? Well, you can do that. Fields exist independently of content types in Drupal. Now, there are some performance advantages. Some. I'll get to that. To reuse an existing field, just use the pop-up, and then after that, it's pretty much just like adding a field. You select the label, you enter any settings that you might have to use, and then you're done. The question is, when do you want to reuse fields? The answer is almost never. When you reuse a field, it has to be exactly the same across all content types. It can't have a little variation. It has to be exactly the same. And you have to assume that the settings on that field will never, ever change. The thing is, most fields aren't reusable because your requirements might seem very solid right now when you're building the site initially, but as time goes on, the site's going to drift. The requirements will change, you'll need those little exceptions, and now you have to face a very painful amount of refactoring in order to add a completely new separate field because you reused another field elsewhere. Also, all those performance gains that you can get by reusing field are pretty much trashed as soon as you use a view. If you've ever used views before, kiss that performance advantage goodbye. It's very easy to negate any performance advantage gained by reusing fields. In my experience, the only time that a field is really reusable is if it's an internal identifier, like an audit identifier or a content identifier that really exists inside your organization that does explicitly have to be the same across all content types. it's a very rare occurrence that you can actually reuse a type. It might take a few seconds longer to actually recreate a type that's very similar to another field somewhere else, but it will be worth it in the end. There are lots of different field types that Drupal provides out of the box. In Drupal 8, there's even more of them. Some of these, like email, date, and link, are actually contrib modules in Drupal 7. You have to actually download them and add them to Drupal. So how do you add these new field types? Well, before you add any new field types to core, check to see if core actually has those. In Drupal 8, we added a lot of new field types so that we don't actually have to go out to contrib and add more all the time. So make sure that core doesn't already give you something, because it will be the most maintainable solution to use as time goes forward. If you still need a custom module, some custom field types, you can go and download a module. The Drupal extends its functionality by modules. There's a saying in the Drupal community called "there's a module for that." And there really is a lot of modules out there. To find new modules, you want to go to drupal.org/download, and then for field types specifically, you want to browse by most install, or browse by category. Field types, browse by category, select fields, and you'll be able to find all the field modules that are provided. Here's some recommended Drupal 7 field modules: URL or link, telephone or phone, date, and email. Why are there two of these for two of these different field types? Well, Drupal 8 extended a lot of the core field types, and then we actually backported some of those modules to Drupal 7. Like the URL and telephone modules are based on HTML5 input types. They're very light modules. And when you move your Drupal 7 site to Drupal 8, they'll be very easily migrated. If you need more functionality, however, do look at the link or the phone modules, because those will provide even more stuff. Date and email, they're contrib in Drupal 7, but they were ported into Drupal 8. So it's the same module. What about multimedia? How do we handle all those videos and audio and everything else? Well, there are the file and image fields out of the box in Drupal 7 and in Drupal 8. In Drupal 7, there's something called the media module, which does a whole bunch of media stuff, including embedding videos from foreign sources like YouTube. Drupal 8, the situation's a little bit more fluid right now. If you want more information about that, Mr. David Reed is actually holding a session on that very topic tomorrow at 3:45 p.m. I think that's even in this exact room. So just sit here and wait over 24 hours and it'll be fine. Of course, if you sit in this room for over 24 hours, you'll miss my session tomorrow. So. How do you install these modules once you find them? I could spend a long time talking about this, but there's already a wonderful page on Drupal.org that's actually a link in the presentation, so you can hit that, which will guide you through the process step by step. There's also another alternative way of doing this using a command line utility called Drush. Drush does a whole bunch of Drupal stuff, but it does it from the command line, outside of the web UI. And it can even download and install modules in the same step. And that's how you would do this with Drush. You would execute Drush, enable, yes, I do want to do this, and then the module name. Drush is another wonderful tool to have in your tool belt, so you might want to look into that too. All right. So we have our content typing. We've broken out all of that big body field into several smaller fields. Okay, things are good, right? Well, let's take a closer look at that title field again. So when we have that title field and it's viewed by several different kinds of viewports, we get something kind of like this. So because I'm a really bad movie fan, we have this kind of particular title. Fourth blob film is a hilarious camping prompt. But then on different devices, it gets cut off again. And suddenly we don't know what this post is about, especially that last one. Is there another blob that just wash up on the Atlantic or something? And then the blobs are back for our little fields too. What did we learn about truncation? It's bad for bodies. It's also bad for fields too. We don't want to do this. We need to make those fields smarter too. Our fields need to be flexible so that we can actually adapt them to the particular needs of the front end. So how do we do that? We take that title field and we decompose it into several different fields. So when we write this, we actually write 3 different titles. And now each one of these actually makes a lot more sense for the particular content type. And we're not hiding anything through mysterious doors any longer. Also, why is the 4th movie always in space? Adaptable content isn't just about making fields, it's about packages of content. We bundle a bunch of fields and we group those with business rules so that we know what to actually gets displayed with what front end. There's one last problem. If we look at our interview content type again, let's take a closer look at that author info field. We broke all of this up out of the body field. Sure, that's fine. But when we look at when we start looking at that across multiple pieces of content, we notice something. Some of these just aren't the same kind of data, the same field, but they are the same data. Our editors are literally copying and pasting from the last thing they wrote to the next thing they wrote, again and again and again. Why are we making them do that? Breaking up the body field does not deduplicate fields, because some fields are actually content by themselves. That author info field is fine if it's just one field, but it's not one just thing. It's multiple things, and it's copied from one post to the next, to the next, to the next by the same person who writes it. It's a mess. We don't want that. And actually, if we look at this field, quote unquote, is multi-part. We have a description, a name, an image. We have a whole bunch of actual content-y stuff that goes with this. So what if the solution is, in addition to breaking up our body field into separate fields, we break up some of these often duplicated fields into another piece of content that we refer back to in the content that we're serving our end user. This is what we call composite content. It bundles up multiple fields and multiple content types so that we can create a whole new thing. It's easier to manage in the back end because we have these separate pieces that we only have to update once, that are separate content of their own, that we can change the formatting individually. It's much better. But it's harder to compose for our writers because the UI kind of assumes one thing to another thing to another thing to another thing. You make one piece of content at a time. You might have to spend additional time making your own custom content authoring page in order to make this process as painless as possible for the writers. You might want to scope that out and discuss that with your clients. How do you assemble this composite content once you build it? There's a lot of different ways of doing it. There's the entity or node reference type, which is just another field. Blocks. Blocks are a perfectly good way of composing composite content. In Drupal 7, there's panels and panelizer. Those are separate modules that you want to look into. In Drupal 8, there's a new thing called entity embed. And David Reed will be talking about that tomorrow too. So what did we learn? Content types are just the first step in our long journey. We can't just separate our channels out. Separating our channels will duplicate the work. It doesn't fix everything. Our body field is a junk drawer. We need to get rid of it. We need to break that up into separate fields that make a lot more sense. Because body basically means the place where we put stuff. It doesn't mean anything. The body field also limits adaptability and remixing. We want to break that up so that we can make new things out of our gradients later on. We want to use groups of fields to create content packages. Also, we want to deduplicate our content with composite content. So a few books that you might want to look into. There's a wonderful book by Karen McCraden called Content Strategy for Mobile. It's not just about mobile, it's just about content strategy. It's a spectacular book and not a long read at all. It'll open your mind to a whole bunch of this stuff. I'm a developer. I had no idea about any of this before I read that book. Also, there's a session that Jeff Eaton gave a few years ago called The Battle for the Body Field. There's a link right here in the presentation to that YouTube presentation. And of course, there's that wonderful card sorting book by Donna Spencer, which will teach you all about information architecture. And that's it. You can find this presentation on github.io.